there was almost always a form of enmity against Eastern European and Middle Eastern guest workers who were considered as if leading to massive unemployment amongst native Germans by apparently taking their jobs. Interestingly, all those guest workers were given the dirtiest jobs which the locals would not touch. For example, cleaning nuclear waste products was left to Turks or Greeks. The Germans preferred not to handle them. I felt sad, but did not want to be bothered about this idiocy, and so decided to emigrate to Canada or Australia. For a little while, however, I needed to concentrate on my studies, my exams, and eventually my graduation, whilst also doing a part-time job with the American forces. On the other hand, I was struggling with my marital status, my concern being unlikely member of a religious order I was forced into, pretending to be happy with it for the sake of peace and hoping it was not going to end in disaster. Unfortunately, it seemed to be like a premonition of things yet to come. During this time, I considered world citizenship and applied for it. In the meantime, I was doing reasonably well at university. However, due to a number of personal issues, I did not score the highest mark in just one subject, thus eventually being forced to graduate in different branches of medicine. My alternative choices were behavioral and forensics psychology, while also considering social sciences. I could always continue with my studies, and according to research, I could lecture at one of the universities in Canada or Australia. I had to keep all aspects of my academic studies and other endeavors a secret from my marital partner and her close friends belonging in the same religious movement like herself, as my endeavor of the academic kind was viewed as being utterly unnecessary, especially before Armageddon. They ardently tried to convince me that now was the important time to preach the word of God to all corners of the world, and everything else, like studying at a university, could be considered after Armageddon. However, I asked them over and over again that if during Armageddon, the end of the world, all those cities, including university buildings, were scheduled to be destroyed along with many human beings due to their faithlessness and denial of God's kingdom, certainly many of the lecturers and professors would also be gone, since masses would not accept the idea of God. Therefore, how could one wait until that time for academic study, and then be disappointed with the situation, for there would be no institutions left to study anything at, and no tutors left to teach? They could not answer me, other than claim that the God of our forefathers was surely capable of creating miracles. I was going to leave all those fantastical dreams to those most faithful to God, and was simply going to go my own way from then on. Magda had great concerns under Jehovah's Witness dictates. For instance, if the man she was married to truly loved his family, he would be unconditionally dedicated to his family and his wife without worrying about anything else. His life had to be a life of hard work with his hands, looking after the needs of his family with or without his wife's input, and serving Jehovah above everything else. especially before the end of the world, which was calculated to happen during 1975. There could be nothing more important than being faithful to God in one's life. In short, I was expected to become naught else other than a dedicated slave, being forced to accept things I could not believe in. For the time being, I could do nothing other than just hope that things would become more favorable. I questioned their belief in regard to post-Armageddon, the time when all the faithful servants of God who had died before the end of the world would be physically resurrected in full health, but would not be able to procreate, just like the angels of God. Only the faithful who never tasted death, as they lived through the end times, would have the option of procreating. I question that if one of us, meaning my wife or me, died before Armageddon, and the other survived, how could one multiply, become many, and populate the earth, when only one of us could procreate? Their response was that only Jehovah knew the answers, and I was once again promptly chastised for questioning the Spirit. On a lighter note, when we dwelt in the flat above the chemist's shop, we discovered it to be damp and extremely moldy in every room. Every wall was wet to touch, and the carpets had a mild but unpleasant smell, akin to old and dried human urine. When the condition was brought to the attention of the chemist, he was extremely disturbed and furious with me, the foreign shit, as he called me. He shouted at us that if we were not happy with his meticulously looked-after flat, we should just pack up and buzz off. At about this time, Magda's mother was working in a florist's on a part-time basis. Through that business, we found a small wooden house in the middle of a market garden, where they also grew a variety of roses, and soon moved there. Living amongst the roses was a beautiful experience. When I moved to Germany, I took many wonderful tape recordings and lots of medium-sized color or black and white negative films, lots of photographs, newspaper cuttings containing information about my relatives, uncles, grandparents, childhood friends, and my mother with me. Magdalena decided to store them in thin newspaper wrappings in the attic. When questioned, she said they were well protected there. However, I was extremely worried, for during winter the attic would become very humid. A little while later, much to Magda's disgust and criticism, I took those so-called secure packets down to discover, to my dismay, that they were soaked in water due to humidity. The entire collection, with more than 1,800 irreplaceable photographs and reel-to-reel tapes, was destroyed. I could only save 1 or 2 items. I was relieved that at least a handful of old photographs and some sound recordings I kept in my briefcase survived the ordeal, as I had kept those memoirs safe under my bed. I was so glad that she had not also put them in the attic. Her reaction to that was not the slightest regret, and she did not even have any feeling of sadness over destroying someone else's only treasures. She reacted as if it was not any of her concern. I simply went to the bedroom to have a little cry, and when she noticed, she asked if I had hurt myself, and nothing else. I said nothing, but deeply saddened. Later she declared that all that clutter was not more important than her family, and they all could one day be replaced. I could not understand how one could replace those irreplaceable memoirs. They were truly lost now and forever. I discovered with this experience that as far as Magda was concerned, memories were not important to her, and again questioned how a human being could exist without memories. I suppose for her, having a mind filled just with Bible verses for her entire existence was sufficient. This is when I began to realize that we were like chalk and cheese, unable to blend, and our dreamt of ideals who would only remain just dreams. Suddenly also at this stage of life there appeared a baby called Annette. She was born in Kirchheim Tech on 6th of June, 1967. I certainly had an exciting and interesting time there since my journey from early 1963 at a very young age. Yet another one of those memories I need to tell you about is this. I feel you, too, might laugh with me, although it is a little naughty. When we left the flat above the chemist's shop and moved out to our market garden house, I felt it was a good time to teach a lesson to those needing to learn something, but also prove my point in regard to the awful humidity in all parts of that other dwelling. I sprinkled a few grass seeds in the corners of the rooms where the floor coverings met the walls, without telling anything to anyone. Even Magdalene had no idea about it. After a while, one could observe beautiful patches of grass growing in the right atmosphere due to the presence of humidity. The very day we vacated the premises on the demand of the owner, using abusive and racist slogans towards me, I felt the need to create an unforgettable experience for him. With the assistance of another friend, who was a farmer, I borrowed a calf and managed to make the young animal climb the stairs and enter the lounge room in the dead of night. We even put a small amount of green grass, some apples, and water in a largish container just before the owner and his assistant inspected the empty flat, while we waited downstairs in the morning. There was some mooing and shouting and shock, along with lots of swearing. When the two men came out of the premises, my friend rushed towards them and asked if they had seen his young calf, as it seemed to have been lost in the area. They looked extremely bewildered. One of the men shouted, "You should be more careful with your freaking cow." By that time, 2 police officers and a reporter had arrived with his camera, and they all rushed upstairs. The cow was gently guided downstairs and passed on to my friend, with the advice that he should be more careful in future. No charges were laid, but I believe my friend enjoyed this hilarious experience. They could not figure out how the animal had escaped and managed to climb up the stairs into the flat, and nobody ever asked how there was grass on the carpet and a container full of water. The keys had been handed over to the owner, and therefore how did the animal enter the flat? The next day's daily papers printed the story accompanying the image of the now famous calf. It certainly caused much amusement. A small article about this incident read something like this: "Even a cow needs an accommodation." And another indicated that the chemist's shop was not a clean and healthily acceptable environment. Hopefully, the lesson had been learned. I thought that if I was questioned, I could explain that such a humid and moldy dwelling should not be rented out, even to someone like me, who the owner often called a cheap and dirty foreign bastard, in front of my family. Again Magda remained completely unstirred, as if nothing untoward had happened. Perhaps she did not even realize what had just eventuated. She would never have seen or read the article in the papers, because, after all, they did not contain God's words. Her interest in the teachings of witnesses was more important than worrying about such trivial matters while pondering on forthcoming house-to-house and door-to-door activities the following week. However, I still cannot forget that wonderful and personal collection of souvenirs, recordings, and multitude of photographs which Magda had protected, according to her own wisdom, in the extremely humid conditions of the attic, where, in a very short time, they were all destroyed. The general belief in those days was that men had very mundane interests in things which they would probably discard as time went by. This was the case with many other people for a very long time. For someone supposedly well-educated like Magda, it was not any different. As far as she was concerned, those items were just useless clutter one needed to get rid of. She did not even ask me if it was all right to put them in the attic, and was extremely angry when questioned where they were. She was even angrier when I took them down. I still wonder, did she perhaps know that what she supposedly helped me with was a successful attempt to destroy something so dear to me, or was it by any chance to eliminate the influence of bad spirits, which were using that physical clutter as she had been instructed to do? Remember, the Strohbachs were burning the gifts my mother had sent me, without me being aware of them. I also remember being told how clever and strong the devil was. On the weekends, when her parents came to visit her during our stay in the cottage, her father never ceased talking about his Nazi memories, and whenever possible played his marching music on Magda's simple hi-fi system, while her mother occasionally cooked a hot Hungarian goulash with the usual added wine. Whenever I was seen doing things men were not meant to do, such as changing nappies or cleaning baby Annette, her grandmother Emilia would rush towards me and literally snatch the little girl from my hands. She used to say a few mildly sarcastic words and make strange sounds like "Yaiguli, yaiguli." Those strange words probably meant nothing, but what she often said to me was hurtful. "She is not your child. Remember that? She is ours, not yours." Interestingly, this was creating very ugly emotions, even perhaps within the psychological makeup of the child, and eventually it came to the surface when she was an adult. Yet, out of respect, I did not say anything. I have swallowed it all, hoping for better things. Despite all their criticisms and condemnations, I secretly recorded all those memorable conversations which I still treasure. While the baby was maturing, the treatment I was subjected to in front of the child continued. Often, when she had been snatched from my hands and subjected to Emilia's loud exclamations, "Come, little darling, your daddy cannot understand a thing and cannot do a thing right. Come to Oma. You are ours. You are only ours." I could not utter a word, for she would never listen to me or attempt to listen to what I might express. I worried that this was going to have a lasting influence on Annette's psychological makeup later. In their own wisdom, they did not see any harm in it, for apparently they were only joking. But the child had already started to show signs of rejection against me, and whenever I mentioned it to Magda, her reaction was either silence or a sigh and nothing more. During their visits, if I was trying to help the little one, or said something like, "Love you, darling," little Annette would scream uncontrollably, and whenever I attempted to touch her face or fingers, she had the worst tantrums one could imagine. I will say that they truly achieved what they desired. The child remained alienated for a very long time. They were either too thick to see what was happening, or have done it purposely. As Annette screamed, it sounded almost like a rubber toy when squeezed hard, and Magda still remained completely unstirred. Unfortunately, whatever I attempted to do or say was interpreted entirely opposite to my nature. What a magical achievement it must have been in their wisdom. From that time onwards, I was seen like an ugly creature by the child, perhaps even a monster. I felt heartbroken, but still said nothing. One other unusual observation was that Magda had the tendency to laugh hysterically out of the blue, or when under mild stress. It was very similar to her mother's trends. Her mother once advised me that if something like that happened, I should not hesitate to smack her lightly across the face, and she would become calm and normal again, for that was apparently the doctor's orders. At first I wondered if it was a deliberate attempt to break our marital state, or was it a genuine concern, or was what she was suggesting a medically recommended treatment. I could not imagine myself doing anything like that. If there was a necessity for psychiatric treatment, it would need to be decided by the appropriate profession. I could not imagine any psychologist suggesting something like that. On the other hand, the witnesses considered psychologists as evildoers and would certainly not consider their involvement. Remember, Magda never wanted to associate with the devil worshippers. I kept recording our illuminating conversations from time to time, although I was always complained about being only interested in electronics. As far as they were concerned, there was nothing better to see in me, other than my supposed shortcomings. I discreetly heard them speaking about me being too naive and still interested in children's toys, hoping that I would soon grow out of it. The electronics I was interested in were seen to be just the same as her father's interests, and apparently he never had any time to spend with his family because of it. Well, after all, men are always the same, like little children, are they not? However, that comparison with Samuel was completely out of place, for he never showed any interest in electronics other than sitting in front of a television set, which is an electronic device, for hours, watching the daily news and other programs, or, at times, turning on his hi-fi system, which was also electronic, to listen to his marching music. One could not regard that as being an interest in electronics. And I was very surprised that a well-educated girl working in an office, as her mother declared, did not know the difference between being interested in electronics or listening to recorded music. Admittedly, I always enjoyed listening to or meditating with music. It seemed that I had to give up all my interests, regardless, particularly my love of music, if I wanted this marriage to last. I was constantly hammered to consider my priorities first. In truth, the whole situation appeared that while running away from a frying pan, I had fallen into the fire. Throughout my so-called marriage, I did not experience what happiness was, and it felt like living in a fool's paradise. However, I am so proud and extremely happy about being interested in electronics, for this way I was able to record the memorable sounds of my world, the conversations of others, their joys and accusations of my person, and my own children's voices as years rolled by. I have taken thousands of photographs of them, recording all their growing up, as well as other interesting subjects within the dream we call life. I filmed my world with whatever equipment was available to me. I used 8mm standard or Super 8 film cameras, U-matic video recording systems, and even VHS devices to capture living images of life around me. None of my interests were appreciated. Remember, Magda originated from a background where anything like my interests in recording sounds was considered as a young child's interest. And therefore, such recordings were never expected to last. Surprise, surprise! I have not only recorded them, I have also professionally preserved them, even after all these years, just to make the point that I too was real, and what I remembered in detail could be compared with those living memories. In fact, I'm also very proud of myself for achieving something like this, and recommend everybody, no matter what their background may be, to keep audiovisual albums. It will prove to be of great benefit if one desires to keep their long and short-term memories alive